All right, welcome back. I hope you're having an awesome time so far. Our next speaker is Michael Rutledge. He's Director, Member Growth at Nike. Please join me in welcoming Michael to our virtual stage.
Hello, thank you everybody for joining. I am sharing my screen now. And thank you for the intro. Very excited to talk to you all today. I'll be speaking with you about defining great use cases for AI as a business leader in our business and marketing leader. So let's dive in. As mentioned, my name is Mike Rutledge. I am a business and product leader over the last decade in many e-commerce, loyalty, and digital businesses at the companies you see here. I've been based in New York City, Dubai, and Portugal in the past, and currently based in Portland, Oregon with Nike. Quick caveat that the views and opinions are my own, and they don't represent the strategy, views, or opinions of any company or brand. So thank you for that. Great, so just to talk and dive right in, the learning objectives I want you to take away today are really starting with what is AI transformation, getting a little bit into selecting an AI pilot program. How do you do that? How do you think about it? And then third is really making your pilot successful. How do you think about increasing the odds of success in developing those programs? So in that, there's really somebody that I think is fantastic in this space that a lot of this presentation is based around, and his name is Andrew Ng. He's a founder of Landing.ai and was a previous co-founder of Google Brain, also spent a ton of time at Baidu. And he really had a fantastic quote just about the disruption that artificial intelligence is leading to and across many industries. And that's really that artificial intelligence is the new electricity. And so if you think about how many interactions we have with electricity in an average day, that's really the level of disruption that AI can have across all industries over the coming years. And on the right-hand side here, you can see just how much the growth of AI has already started, but how much there is to go in terms of the future of AI. Statista has a great stat there. So based around that, why AI is coming to retail. So retail was not definitely the first industry of disruption, but it is coming. And there's really 4 reasons why. The first is really the elevated consumer expectations. So as consumers start to interact in other environments with AI on an ongoing day-to-day basis, it really becomes like a baseline expectation for consumers that everything is smart. Why isn't my refrigerator smart? Why is why am I not getting recommendations in every moment for the things that make sense to me? If I only like red pants, why aren't you telling me all the great red pants that you offer? So there's lots of consumer expectations that are growing. Also, the growing interconnectedness of data. So that really is about, as more and more companies have large data lakes and we're tracking more and more things, just different interactions, these massive data warehouses have great interconnectedness, which allows for basically all of that data to act as the gasoline in the car that is AI. Omnichannel experiences and opportunities. So really, like every retail company now is omnichannel. If you're a physical only retailer and you're not thinking about digital, definitely let me know in the comments, because that is not what I've seen, especially over the last year. And then the last is really supply chain sophistication. So as the supply chains, more nodes coming online, more nodes tracking and measuring, and then just the complexity of the supply chains are increasing. So all of that together leads to a very high readiness for retail to be disrupted by AI, which has already begun, a lot of us know, but we know that that's going to increase as well. So then talking about what is like AI transformation and how can your company start to get into the realm of AI and where to start and how to think about a framework. So Landing.ai is really a company that, again, Andrew Ng founded and has a lot of training about this and publishes something called an AI Transformation Playbook. And that's what we're going to base the discussion around today. But we'll really start and spend the time in the first pillar of that transformation, which is about how to execute pilot projects to gain momentum for your overall transformation program. So what we'll talk about today is really about how you can build on a successful pilot program to better enable your AI transformation in your organization. Then in terms of getting right into it, how you would assess whether a project idea is a good one for an AI program. So when you're thinking about whether or not to get into a certain project and whether it's a good candidate for AI, these are the types of criteria that I really recommend you use in terms of defining whether or not to go forward with it, because success at the early stage is really critical. The fear is that your company goes through an early project, it doesn't work as expected, and then it's like, oh, okay, AI just isn't right for us. And that's really, really, I've seen that happen. It's really painful to get around that. So setting that initial project up for success is really important. And so the three key criteria that we'll go through in sort of a discussion format after that, in these two use cases here, are around return on investment. So basically, how high is the consumer value versus the cost? How complex is the consumer experience? Like, if it's a AI model, how do you actually help a consumer or a user to actually interact with that model in a way that they understand it, but they don't have to know all the the stuff about AI and how it works in order to get the value. And then data readiness perspective is really like, are you collecting enough data? Is the data in a way that you can use it for an AI model? And is it the right type of data? Do you have all the types that you need for that? So we'll talk about this more in just a moment. I also listed sort of, there's a rough scoring here in terms of which, you might have a number of project ideas that you want to talk about with regard to AI. You might have tons in your organization around like, okay, this could be an application for AI, and so could this one, and so could this one. But not all of them will be great pilot projects for AI. So you'll really want to think about which one is the best candidate, especially in that early stage. So the two that we'll talk through today are here, and then you can, we'll discuss how to apply these criteria and select a great project for AI. So the first idea is really a virtual look builder. So this is, and some of you may have explored or seen some of these in retail stores before, but the idea is really that you could go into a retail store and sort of shop full looks and style recommendations based on an individual product. So maybe you like a pair of red pants, and you're like, what shoes and what shirt and what belt and what watch goes with this, and so you'd be able to sort of craft a full look, and then be able to access the inventory in the retail door, but also in digital. And then you might be able to get or accept behavioral nudges like buy the full look and get a discount or something like that. So this is the overall project idea. And we'll go through now a series of questions, which I hope you're ready to get into the chat to discuss whether this is a good pilot idea for your company for AI. So the first question to ask yourself when thinking about whether this type of a project could be good for your company in AI would be like thinking about the customer value that it could bring. What do you think the customer value would be in building a project like this? And I'll give you just a couple of seconds to reply in the chat. So one thing you would want to think about is really how many consumers might you be able to serve with something like this? And in terms of your total store traffic, let's say you could have 1 to 4 consumers using this at any given time, and their average session is 10 to 15 minutes. That puts a number of total consumers per retail door that you would be able to serve with this type of feature. So that's sort of one notation you would want to make with this. Another calculation would be what type of impact would you expect to see for those that do use this? Probably an increase in units per transaction because you have more people buying a full look, so more items. Probably a higher store conversion rate, ideally. Once they interact with this, they're more likely to buy. And potentially a higher return frequency. If they like this, they would come back to the store more frequently. So that starts to bring you to a perspective around what the total upside is. That imagine double the units per transaction and a certain number of consumers per day over a certain number of months. Then you start to get, okay, here's the type of impact we would see from this feature. Then what types of data would you need to actually power behind the hood of this type of a model? Well, one type of data you definitely need is all of like, what's the inventory look like, not just front of house, but also back of house at that individual retail door. You might also want the inventory of digital to show up in that model. You might want sales data to know which of those are the best sellers. You'd also need some of the actual sort of metadata associated with tagging, that this pair of red pants connects to this shirt, connects to this watch and belt into full looks. So that either has to be done manually by a merchandiser or by a marketer, or needs to be done through the AI of how does the AI actually craft different looks. And so then thinking about the costs is sort of the last piece of this. What types of costs would be associated with this type of a project? Well, obviously it has a big hardware component because it's a giant tablet touchscreen type of experience. You could imagine other ones, but just for sake of this one, let's imagine that. So that's one major component. Then you might have, so you have the cost of setup and hardware and maintenance. Then you have training. So it would be, you might need, especially in the early days, employees to be highly trained on this in terms of how do they guide consumers through this item. And then you'd have some amount of cost on what consumer experience cost might there be if the feature doesn't work. Like if it's broken one time when they go in, is there a sort of a cost where consumers get frustrated? Oh, you have this big, amazing thing, but it's always broken when I come in. There could be a risk there. So from those questions, what do you think in the chat? Let me know. Do you think that this is a great use case for AI? Initial use case for your company in a project for AI? For me, I think this is a great feature idea and a great experience, but I don't think it's a great experience for a pilot project for a company for AI. I think the costs are high and the potential where it could just not quite have the impact that is expected at the outset is high enough that the costs that overtake the costs. And so I think if you do this one, or something that is big on these dimensions, I think it's a tricky one to start your AI experience as a company through, for those reasons, that it can be costly, and the importance of that initial project success is so high that this is a tricky one to start with. So hopefully that discussion is helpful in this one. We'll go into the next one and talk a little bit of a totally different use case to show a different side of how you might select an initial AI project. So this one you may have had some experience with. I know I have. I bought a car last year and used a platform like this. So this is the Car Gurus example, but it is not limited to Car Gurus or any sort of marketplace company at this stage. But this is sort of a platform that brings together buyers and sellers of used cars or new cars. And so with this, you have a feature that helps to support buyers and sellers, but in this case, buyers of cars, to know whether it's a good price. So it's comparing, it's offering a good price indicator. So you can see here, this 2017 Ford F-150 XLT Super Cab is listed as a good deal. So it helps the buyer to know, hey, this is a good deal, which is great. It also has a comparison feature, so you can see other similar cars to it based on price. It also has behind the scenes some seller price recommendation features. So when somebody is posting a car, it will also tell them, hey, this is higher than others. So the intent behind it and the expected impact is really that it clears the hurdle for buyers to know whether the price is good and how it compares. And so that's traditionally one of the biggest pain points on this type of platform. Let's do the same thing. Let's discuss how this feature might be of value to potential buyers, and through that, discuss whether this is a good potential pilot project for AI. So let's start with what data you think is needed to make this feature work. What do you think is powering behind the hood? So I've worked on this one before, this type of feature, not at Car Gurus, but with OLX Group. And with that, there are a number of data sources, several of them external, to use and to use together and to consolidate and to power this type of a feature. So one is around the platform ads. So obviously it will look at all of the other Ford F-150s and similar type cars that have previously been posted on the platform. So that's one piece of data. Another piece of data is all the market sales. So there's actually companies like Carfax that sell all of the transactions that are published sort of yearly, annually together. So you have all of that, like what are cars actually bought at. Insurance companies sometimes offer this data too. And then there's also the vehicle attributes of all of the cars. So this is not just a 2017 Ford F-150 regular, it is an XLT super cab. So it will be a, let's say, higher price on average than a regular one. So you can't just say, this is a bad price and a regular Ford is a good price, because they're different. There's premium features associated. So you need all of those vehicle metadata attributes to come together to power also that model of what is a good or not good price. So let's discuss the next question. Can you think of any challenges in communicating this feature to the digital car buyers? So in this sense, thinking about that pillar number 2, are there any challenges in this feature that you think makes it hard to communicate what a consumer should take from this as a feature? So a couple things that are really challenging about this. One is that because of the different types of data, it can be hard to assess whether it's actually a good deal. For example, none of the transactions, it's not like Amazon. You don't buy the car on the platform on almost all of these platforms, CarGurus, TrueCar, eBay. You're not buying the car on that platform. So they have previous posting data, but that is actually what the seller posts the price as, not what it's actually sold as. So that difference is actually quite important. And so knowing as I said, they're buying some of the data in the back end from Carfax of like what the price of that car actually sold at. But in this sense, do you show the platform number of like base it around the platform number, which might be 10%, 5% lower or higher? And then, or do you go with the actual end sell amount? That's another one. Also, you have old cars that start to go up in value over time because they become classic cars. So that, there's those use cases, and there's many of those use cases where premium feature, XLT super cab type, or, have premium experiences baked in. And so there's a lot of desire for those, the desirability goes up as well. There's also seasonality and other things. So that AI model becomes complex to communicate all of that to the buyer. The great part about AI is that it will balance all of that and come out with the best recommendation. But communicating that to the buyer makes it hard because it's not as easy as just saying, "Oh, good deal, like buy it at this price and you're set." Right? It's a little more complicated than that. So then I would ask you, do you think that this is a great use case, a great pilot use case for AI? For me, I think it actually is a good use case, a good pilot use case for AI. Why? Because it's a good combination of data that is not that large. There's only maybe 100,000 rows of data for the types of cars that exist in the market. There's only a certain number of thousands of transactions per year in the country of cars. And so combining that data and building a small AI model, it's not overly complex. The complex part is actually around the user experience, as we sort of just went through a little bit. And so how to iterate through that and really make this valuable to buyers and sellers is the hard part. And the interesting part about what I've seen in AI projects that's illustrated here is that's actually a really important part of building any AI model is how does the end consumer or user actually interact with it? And how do you iterate through and making sure to plan time to iterate on how that experience starts to show up and be used is really important. So this was not obviously CarGurus's first approach at this. And in my experience, when we built this, in my experience, it is not, it was not our first one that worked either. So that is a really, really challenging component of it that is often underrated. A lot of teams think that, okay, once we build the model, the user experience is actually very simple, but it can be very complex. And so using that as an example, thinking about how to make your pilot project successful. So selecting a pilot project idea that has high value to cost. So again, that the one with the price recommender, not very costly to create because the data actually isn't, it doesn't need a lot of gasoline to make that model run, that car run. It did have it does have a huge impact. It is one of the top problems that buyers face in terms of assessing whether to buy a car. But planning that design and ensuring the data is ready and expecting for iteration in the early can really, manage that. Like, it's not overly complex in terms of coming out with the best recommendation there. So as long as you plan for some iteration, you can really increase your chances for success. And then third is really building on your successful pilot. So in building this initial price recommender, open tons of doors for other price-related or market-related analysis products for car sellers. So how can you could go into how does somebody who's selling a car assess the entire market and know whether the price of that car is going to go up or down? Maybe they're able to buy other cars that they think will go up in price or at a good price. And so these types of things start to build out from that initial pilot. So building on that success is really critical in sort of leading to those other pillars of AI transformation we talked about at the beginning. So quickly summarizing the overall takeaways from the session today. So I know we went through a lot of content. I'll just wrap up here with a couple of highlights of what I want you to take away. One is about the stages of AI transformation. So you'll see the overall playbook in the resources and on that slide, link to it. Landing.ai is a really great place to start thinking about how you can bring AI to your company. And really the best way is starting with a pilot. So whether it's you're partnering with an external company to help you out, or you're doing it internally and sort of setting it up before jumping into building a big AI team or AI workforce, really start with how can you start to work through the organization to come up with good use cases and execute those, and then scale from there with training, building it into your strategy and sort of selling it to your team in the market. Second, in terms of selecting a pilot program, make sure that it is a meaningful enough project, that your data is ready, and that it has high success potential and high impact with your consumer base. In terms of making your pilot program successful, we talk about planning for iteration is really critical. So you don't, one and done, hey, it's out there and it didn't work. Okay, let's move on to something else. You plan for when it's going to end up with consumer iteration, that you have some amount of iteration plan to really make it useful for your consumer base, that you're collecting learnings and really understanding why it's working or why it's not and how you can improve it. And then building on the success. Once you understand why it's working in that small individual project or use case, continuing to extend that to other use cases that are similar. Thank you so much. I'll just leave you with a couple of resources. So the Landing.ai Transformation Playbook, use case definition template is also basically a more tailored way of looking at that, and basically a fill in the blank type of view. AI and retail industry analysis. And then there's a ton of free resources on Coursera for AI training that are really cool, that are taught by Ender Eng and through Landing.ai. So I think those are great resources that have been helpful as well. Thank you so much for your time. Any questions you have, definitely reach out, but that's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing with us. This has been an incredible presentation with amazing insights, and we appreciate it. And I know the audience is giving you a virtual round of applause. All right, for the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and check out our amazing AI exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.